Greetings and welcome to the Bowling Green First United Methodist Church. We hope that you enjoy what you're about to see, and you can find us on the corner of Broadway and Church Streets at 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. Or you can find us at bgmethodist.org and on Facebook at Bowling Green First United Methodist Church. So we are kind of continuing on this journey and kind of looking at our Methodist heritage, and this morning is an important Sunday because we are making the transition from the Red Book to the Blue Book. And every time I've said that this morning, everybody looks at me and goes, why is that important? And it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference to any of the rest of y'all, but those are about the two best books that we have for, they kind of that tell the story of our Methodist heritage. And the Red Book covers John Wesley's life and gets us through the beginnings of Methodism in England. And then that Blue Book it's even titled The Story of American Methodism, so you can imagine what it's about. It gets us to how did we get to where we are in the U.S. today, and how did that come about? And there's an important thing that happens as we go from England to the States, or at the time to the colonies, because we weren't yet separate from Britain. And that is that we continue to build on the lessons that we learned from John Wesley, but then we take it even a bunch of steps farther. And we keep in mind one of the things that we looked at last week, just kind of these two pieces. The first one is, who are we to judge? That's not our job to do. But our judge is to ask this question: where's your field? Where is it that we are called to go and to share that good news? Maybe some place that we aren't used to doing that in. Remember that this comes from when Wesley wrote this in his journal, and he said, "At 4 in the afternoon I submitted to be more vile." Because Wesley was this very stuffy, very kind of uptight at times, high church Englishman. He was not going to separate himself from the church at all. Churches were where you preach, churches was where you worship, churches was where you did church stuff. You didn't do that in other places. And yet, friends of his were going out into the fields and preaching to others, and they were reaching folks that couldn't be reached. And so Wesley decided at some point, he's like, I've got to do this thing I really don't want to do. I don't want to do it, but I'm going to do this vile thing. And he kind of unbends himself a little bit and loosens up a little. And he goes out into the fields and started preaching to folks. And these were folks that no one else was reaching, that no one else was preaching to, that no one else was talking to. And so he is out there preaching to all of these folks and doing crazy, wonderful, amazing things. But it took him some getting used to. And it took him some kind of moving on. And we take that story, we take what Wesley did, this kind of practical, pragmatic sense that as Methodists we have that says, well, maybe we can let go of some things and unbend a little bit ourselves, and because that's where we need to go. That's the people that we need to find. And this is what began to happen. About 1770, there's a man by the name of Francis Asbury, who is very important in our history of American Methodism, because the Methodists were getting started. And our first Methodist church, I shouldn't say Methodist church, it was more of a preaching house, was out of this place called the Delmarva Peninsula, out by Delaware, Maryland, Virginia. It was started by a guy named Robert Strawbridge. I always wanted to call him Robert Strawberry for a long time until I got my head wrapped around his name. But he started it out there. Time goes on, and the American Methodists are saying, we need a little bit more leadership, a little bit more direction. And so back in England, Wesley knows this guy who's a part of their society. He's named Francis Asbury. And he says to him, Francis, I'm going to send you across the pond, and you're going to go and you're going to be the general assistant for the Methodists over there and give them the kind of leadership they need. Now, Asbury wasn't ordained. He wasn't a priest. He was just a lay person inside of the Church of England, but he was very active in the Methodist movement and was one of Wesley's important assistants. And so Asbury does. He comes over in about 1771 and takes leadership of the Methodists in America. Now, given that next week is 4th of July weekend, and hopefully none of us blow ourselves up in the process of that, we know what's coming next, though, in our history. That is that things are about to get a little bit interesting for us. And this would cause a little bit of friction between American Methodists and English Methodists, because John Wesley was not in favor of our separating ourselves from England. He didn't think that was a good idea. He thought that was a really bad idea, in fact, and that caused a little bit of tension, but we make it through that time. You know, we come out on the other side of the Revolutionary War. We're established now as our own nation. With that brings us trouble, though, that all of those Church of England priests, for some reason, they don't stay. They decide they're going to go back home, or they're going to go find someplace else that's more friendly to them, and we're left without any church leadership. And so the Americans, they write to Wesley and kind of patch things back up and say, we need help, we need something. We're stuck out here, we don't have anything, but look at all these people that we are bringing in, that we are preaching to, because their numbers kept going up and up and up, and Wesley is struggling, because remember, he is this very, for as much as he unbent, he was still kind of a stuffy Church of England guy, and he knew what needed to happen, which was that we had to start our own church over here, but he wasn't sure how to make that happen. Finally, he figures it out. He does what he had done consistently throughout all of his career, which was he went back to the early church and to Scripture and said, well, how did they do it? Because it's not like they had a lot of church hierarchy at the time when they were getting started. They didn't have a lot. How did they do that? And Wesley took some lessons from them, and he said, well, okay, I've got the authority that I can ordain priests. He's like, so okay, I've got that. I can do that part. And then he says, and because there is a need for it, I am going to ordain a general superintendent. Now, he doesn't call him a bishop, because he knows he's got this real fine line in there that he's got to walk. He's got to be real careful about how far he can push that. Superintendent is the Latinized version of the Greek word episkopos, which we get episcopal, which is generally where we put our bishops on the episcopacy. So they're kind of up there. Wesley's like, I can't call them bishops because I would get in some real trouble if I did that. So he says, I'm going to call them superintendents instead. That sounds a little bit better and still talks about their function that they're doing. And so he does that. He ordains this guy by the name of, oops, forgot to put Wesley. That's John Wesley. I forgot to put his picture up. But he ordains this guy by the name of Thomas Coke, who is a priest in the Church of England, ordains him as a superintendent and sends him over to America to take leadership over the American church, to start a church, not just a bunch of folks that were meeting in small groups in preaching houses and such, but to found an official church and to ordain other people. That was the new thing that he was doing, and this was really controversial, but again, it was what the people needed. Because that's where the people, they said, we need this leadership, we need this help, we need more than what we've got now. And Wesley said, you're right. Wesley had meant a little bit more, and he said, this is what we'll do. And he sends Thomas Coke over. Now, keep in mind, Francis Asbury is still hanging around, and he is still the leader of the Methodists in America, and so he's going to have a role to play in this. Coke comes over, he meets with Asbury and some others, and they call for a conference to be held starting on Christmas Eve 1784. In our Methodist history, we call this the Christmas Conference. And this is where Asbury begins to do something different, where he begins to take the lessons of Wesley and that practical, pragmatic philosophy that Wesley had and take it even a couple of more steps farther. Now, historians will tell you that if you've got a very charismatic, energetic, intelligent leader of a movement, it's really hard to follow that person, because you don't often get two people like that in the same generation that can work with one another. And we already had that in John Wesley in England. He lived to be 91 years old, and until the day he died, he was one of the most active people in all of England. He was always moving, always doing something. He was doing enough things at one time that most of us would be glad to call a single career. He was doing all these things simultaneously. That's a hard act to follow, but Francis Asbury was ready for it. He was someone who had just as much energy and just as much excitement and enthusiasm to carry our movement forward, but also was smart enough to know that things were going to be a little bit different because we're Americans and we're a little bit different than most everybody else, especially those of us here in Missouri. Asbury said, I will be more than happy to be ordained as a superintendent, or they would end up calling themselves bishop because they weren't worried about that fine line that Wesley was trying to walk. And they said, I'll be happy to do that on one condition. And that condition is that all the preachers that are gathered for that have to approve of it. I want their approval. I want their election into this because I'm not going to do this by myself. That's all these things. That's a very American thing to do, is to have an election. And that is still, in fact, how we do this today. That's why we don't know who our new bishop's going to be in the state of Missouri yet, because we haven't elected bishops yet. We're going to do that later this month. We'll have delegates that will go to a meeting where they will sit down, they will elect new bishops, and then some of those representatives from each conference will get together, they'll go into a room and they'll say, all right, now where are we going to put all these bishops? It's not one person that's making those appointments, but it's a group of folks that are figuring out how to do that. That's a very American way of doing things. It was very unusual in churches at the time for that to happen. But that's what Asbury does. He receives the overwhelming approval from folks, and he is ordained, but in a different kind of service, because laying hands on Francis Asbury in that picture is Thomas Coke, who Wesley had ordained as superintendent with the ability and the authority to do this, but also is a gentleman by the name of William Philip Otterbein. You don't have to remember that name, there won't be a test on this later. But he was one of the founders of the United Brethren Church, who would later on go to join with a group of folks called the Evangelical Association, who later on would then become a part of the United Methodist Church later on down the road. But this was important for Asbury, and has become a part of our tradition that anytime we have folks that are ordained, we have representatives from another denomination that are there to lay hands on them also, because we are not just doing this on our own, but we are a part of the universal church. That's not just us doing our own thing, but we are a part of this with others, and one of the ways we signify that is by inviting others to come and participate in our ordination, so that they are helping to set our folks out on the work that they are doing. And so that's, we'll hear more about kind of some of the stuff that takes place in a couple of weeks, but that gets us there. That gets us now we are officially, with Asbury's ordination at the Christmas conference, we are officially our own church, and we called ourselves after that. We said we are now the Methodist Episcopal Church. Now that was just the start of things, though, because it was going to be kind of a rocky road for a while we figure things out, figure out what it is that we're going to be doing, and how we be the church in a very distinctly American way that reaches folks in lots of different places in different ways, and more importantly, goes with folks as they were going west. First west from the original colonies, then west of the Mississippi, then west of the Rockies, out to all the way out to the Pacific coast. This was where we were going, and every place anyone was going, there the Methodists were going also. In fact, some historians call the 1800s the Methodist century, because we were that important in the movement west of the United States. That's where we're ultimately going. But what does that mean for us today? How does that help us and kind of lead us today in what we're doing? We go back to what James writes. He says, you must be doers of the word and not only hearers who mislead themselves. James oftentimes catches a lot of grief because a lot of folks will say, well, James is really concerned with everyone doing all of the right things and doing all of the right works. And we forget that James also puts up there of equal importance, you've got to have faith too. That if your faith is good, you are going to do good works. If you're doing good works as a Christian person, you're doing that out of the faith that you have. These things are tied inextricably together. But it's also a call for how we do the work of the church, which should be as kind of a very practical, pragmatic sort of way that says, where are the people? Where are they? What do we need to be doing so that we can reach folks? What do we need to be doing so that we can learn and we can grow ourselves? Wesley would put this a little bit differently. I've got to look the quote up because I can't ever remember it all. Wesley would come out and he would say, here we go. He would say this in one of his sermons, but in many others of his sermons and his writings, he would say very similar things. He says, "Your life is continued to you upon earth for no other purpose than this, that you may know, love, and serve God on earth and enjoy Him to all eternity." The point is that we can get caught up in a lot of things. And sometimes there are things that are important that we get caught up in. Sometimes there are things that aren't important. And sometimes, like when the kids were up here earlier, there are things that just kind of don't seem to fit with with getting us where we want to go, which quite honestly was for a Tootsie Roll, because that's what I wanted. Sometimes we kind of get ourselves all mixed up. But we remember where we are called to be, to know, love, and serve God. That becomes our guiding point, our guiding perspective in who we are and what we do. That leads us forward, that helps us make it through sometimes the complicated places we find ourselves in. This was the example that Asbury would give to us in his very long ministry in establishing the church here in America. This was the kind of ministry that Wesley had. That was, for so long, it was what he was seeking after and what he was trying to do. How could he best know, love, and serve God? And that led him to doing all the great things that he did. But more importantly, this is the message that we see Jesus teach us from the very beginning. That most important is to how do we know who God is, how can we show our love for Him, and how can we serve Him through the works that we do and the way that we live our lives. Let us go this week to be those people called to know, love, and serve God, to take that throughout our lives and ask ourselves that question every day, say, are we doing the right things here? And then to take that out and share that with those around us. Let us go and do this in Christ's name. Amen.